Rachel Burch is the dynamic founder of the Love Before 100 podcast. Rachel's entrepreneurial story begins with her 10-year career as an attorney, transitions into a decade of life and business coaching, and eventually leads her to the unexpected realm of dating after divorce. Rachel turned her personal adventures into a podcast sensation, reaching the top 1% by sharing the ups and downs and laugh out loud moments of modern dating. Together, we'll explore how Rachel's podcast has touched lives, her unique perspective on dating in today's world, and the brand new podcast she's launching, A Story Worth Living. Whether you're an entrepreneur facing your own challenges or someone navigating the dating scene, Rachel's insights and experiences are sure to resonate. As always, if you found value from this content, please like and subscribe. And now here's my conversation with Rachel Burch. Enjoy. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Beyond Fulfillment podcast. I'm your host, Dave Goulas, and this week, my guest is the founder of the Love Before 100 podcast, Rachel Burch. Welcome, Rachel.
Hi, Dave. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. If you could, for everyone, can you tell us about this podcast and how it got started?
Sure. So I'll go back to, I spent 10 years as an attorney, and then the next 10 years as a life and business coach. And when I got a little burnt out on the coaching world, I started looking at other ways that I could be of service and help teach personal development. I do stand-up comedy and I try to incorporate it there, and I'm writing a book and I try to incorporate it there. So when I started dating again after divorce, I did not intend to have a podcast about it. I've typically been more of a private person with my private life, but the more hurdles that I hit, the more, unpleasantness that presented itself. I decided to apply a lot of my entrepreneurial skills to the love journey. And then it kind of lent itself to that. Like, for example, when I used to coach in business, I'd say, well, while you're working towards your goal, when you achieve your goal, what are some things that you wouldn't be able to do, right? If you had a multi-million-dollar company, you might not be able to move to Europe and live there for a month or whatever. So I started thinking, what are some things that I couldn't do if I was in a forever relationship? And I wrote out this bucket list of things, like different men that I wanted to date, and kind of became this scavenger hunt. And so, I put it together in the hopes that I could help people feel less lonely on the dating journey, and also to keep myself accountable. Because if you've ever been out in the dating world, especially now, you really want to quit. Kind of same thing like with the entrepreneurial journey. It's like you just want to quit. So I figured, if I launch this podcast telling stories about dating, then I have to go out on dates, and I set myself up for a win-win. So my worst dates, in fact, there's one date where I'm at a guy's house at 10 at night. It's a third date. And someone comes and knocks on the door and tries to get in. And I end up hiding behind the dresser in his bedroom. It's a very funny podcast. And I'm sitting there going, this is really bad for Rachel, but really good for the podcast. So it was kind of I was too excited to tell everyone about this terrible story and that I could hear everything that they were saying, to be disappointed that this obviously was not the love of my life. So yeah, that's how it came about. Long answer, but.
Wow. Okay. So a lot to unpack there. So
Yeah.
So you're a very private person, and you're going on this dating journey now after divorce in your 40s, and to help you deal with, I guess, just just like entrepreneurship can be a grind and can be a lot of loneliness and tough days and things that you just, like you said, sometimes you just want to give up. Dating, right, particularly at a later age, can be the same thing. So this was almost like a coping mechanism type of thing to help you, through that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you're familiar with the hero's journey.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So hero's journey is something that a lot of people use entrepreneurial, right? Kind of the character arc of going from not having a successful business to having a successful business. So for me, I just looked at it as, how can I grow? What areas do I want to grow in? How can I use the hero's journey for myself, and then do it in a way that would help other people, which is kind of how the podcast, came. So it was growth, it was accountability, it was definitely a coping mechanism, is like setting up a win-win. I love podcasting. There's so many benefits to it that I just felt like it was a really great avenue for sharing my dating woes.
And how long has the show been running?
About 2 years. It's it's set up by seasons. So I have 3 seasons. Originally, my goal was to sell it as a sitcom pilot. So I wanted to set the podcast up the way sitcom shows are run, like 10 episodes, 3 seasons. And so yeah, that's how it's set up. It's been about 2 years.
Okay. Okay. So then how many episodes so far? Like,
So there's 30 episodes and there's a couple trailers in there.
okay.
3 seasons, yeah.
And is every episode like a different date, basically?
Yeah,
Okay.
and there are multiple dates. And there's a couple like through lines, but the seasons are each individually. Like the first journey was growing up in Newport Beach. Everything's very superficial. And it was from me looking to men to like choose me, to me like choosing myself, basically, first one. And then the second one was kind of like the loneliness factor and the depression of it and just getting through that. That one is the most, like, I'd say, vulnerable. And then the third season was giving up on looking for love and trying to, basically looking for sex. So that was a journey too.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what was the process like? I mean, how difficult was it when you decided to do this, to really be so open and vulnerable, and just because I listened to a couple episodes and it's just you telling these stories, right, about your dating life. And then, like you said, it holds you accountable, but wow, that's a lot of pressure in terms of having to continually be out there dating, go on dates, get the content, get the
Yeah.
experience, and then you tie it in with the scavenger hunt, which sounds like a blast. But again, still, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot to do. So I mean, what's that process been like for you?
A lot of learning. What happened was the very first episode, the kind of catalyst for turning this into this was that I met a man on a plane and we had this long distance relationship. And then he was the type of man that, once you sleep together, he loses interest. It's like that whole pursuit was was the point of everything. And being new to the dating world, I didn't know that that was a thing. And I was working with a client at the time and she had the exact same thing happen. And I could hear her saying the same things that I had said, which were like, maybe if I didn't do this, or maybe if this had happened. And I thought, and she was blaming herself and making herself wrong. And I thought, like, ugh, if I tell people that it happened to me, then, it just becomes more of like an okay thing. There's not as much like shame or blaming yourself. So that's where it started, was really in being of service to other people. There's this guy that I met on Bumble like 2 years ago. I've never met him. We're just friends and we text each other and he'll send me songs. And one day I was sitting down thinking like, what am I doing? What's my motivation for this podcast? And he sent this song through, and the lyrics were this man talking about how he writes songs and that he labors for hours hoping that his voice will like cut through the noise and just affect one person. And I thought, oh yeah, I like that. If I can just affect one person. I didn't do it thinking I would get to top 1%. In fact, I probably wouldn't have done it if I thought I would get to top 1%, because it is more of a private story. But you start getting message. I have this woman in Denmark that found me through being on a different podcast, and she said she started to trust men again and open up her heart and date. And now she's living with someone. And just because, she heard my story. And so that is pretty motivational to keep going. The other learning thing was, like you said, to try to go on dates, get content, like hope it was interesting enough to write about, because there's so many dates that are just boring. And I actually did an episode on that. Like, they're not always exciting. But to get the content, write it, rewrite it, script it over and over again, record it, like get it edited with like every week, that was hard. That was stressful. So that was the first season. The second season, I spread it out and did it every other week instead of weekly. And my audience didn't like that. They wanted weekly. So for the third season, I just started doing everything really early until I batched, I had like 4 episodes ready to go. And then I wasn't like chasing the deadline as much, but everything is 100% true. Nothing's made up. The universe really showed up for me, giving me like men and stories and content. Like I said, hiding behind that dresser was like the greatest thing that could have happened for the podcast. So, yeah.
And I mean, the other pressure is like, what happens? You meet the right guy, and
Yeah.
then there's no more new dates. There's no more like what happens then?
Well, that's the thing. My goal has always been love. It isn't like having a really spectacular podcast. And so I didn't tell every man about the podcast. It wasn't like I kept it a secret, but a lot of first dates, it just didn't warrant it. But those that I did would have the same question. Like, well, are you actually looking for, and like, yes, I would gladly, give up having a top podcast to have like a relationship with a good human being. So yeah, I knew I would shift it, and I actually did. I came up with a new podcast, kind of a different direction. And I know that it's not going to appeal to the same people. And like as an entrepreneur, sometimes we have to make changes that don't, I have one guy that listens that I met at a podcasting convention. He was like, honestly, I wouldn't listen if it wasn't about dating. And it was like, well, you're not my ideal client. And you know, I can't make all of my business moves based on like making every single person happy. It has to be aligned for me. And then obviously also make good business sense.
Sure, sure. And we'll get into the new podcast in a second here, but let's just talk about the impact that this show has had. Like you said, you get letters from people and you're in touch with some of the fans, like from someone that started this almost as like, you weren't planning to do it and weren't planning to scale it like this, and to have it be so successful, so popular, and like, what's the response been like from the listeners, and how they, got value from that they've shared with you?
Yeah, I mean, I set my podcast up so that I have a cliffhanger at the end of every episode. So I would get a lot of messages from that. What happens next? How dare you, um, you jerk, but like lovingly kind of, and so definitely engaged. I mean, you can watch your stats on your podcast and I'll see like somebody in Sweden, like downloading every single episode, like within a, 4-hour time frame or whatever. So I know that I've created like a bingeable podcast that has kind of been something that I've has been important to me, to make it so that it wasn't just in the queue of other podcasts. I wanted to be like someone's favorite show that they couldn't wait for the next episode to release. And so I got a lot of feedback from people, saying that ever since I've been on hiatus since February, I get just messages on Instagram like, I need to know what's happening in your dating life, you know? So there's like, when I released the very first episode, it was also very vulnerable. And so I got a lot of people saying like, oh, wow, you get people on your side pretty quickly, which was not my intention, but I'm glad that was the effect. And so I think it's kind of like somebody to root for, like when you watch your favorite show, you're rooting for someone, but it's made up. And this is like real life. In the second season, everything's scripted, but I did one episode where I just came on and I was like, I had a really bad night last night. I had panic attacks. I had depression. I talked a lot about like really the low of the lows of dating. And I got a lot of feedback to that episode of just being like, wow. And that really spoke to me. And, thank you for being so vulnerable. I try to find that with any of the things that I do, I hate lead by example, because I'm not trying to position myself as like the leader of all these people, but I get a lot of messages from people that say, because you did this, now I'm doing that. And so I feel like I just try to go out and be brave, and then let other people, give them permission to be brave, let them know they're going to be okay if it fails, you know? So yeah, it's just feedback that like what I'm doing by sharing what I'm doing is making a difference for people's individual lives.
Attention manufacturers and e-commerce sellers. Is fulfillment a headache for you? Whether you're fulfilling in-house and you know you need to outsource, or you're with another 3PL, you know you deserve better service. Easy DC 3PL can help. We offer personal service, fast response time, and we're flexible to meet your unique needs. Get in touch today and find out how we can help you. And another question, since you're very active in the scene, and you have this show, and you've done so much sharing and whatnot. How would you say dating is changed? Because I hear stats like less and less people are getting married today than previous, decades and whatnot. And like, how would you say dating has changed in the modern world of where we are today, for adults?
Well, one of the things that makes the podcast funny is that I never dated. I had a high school boyfriend. I didn't date in college. And then I met my ex-husband like our first day of law school. So I didn't know how to date. I've heard nice stories about what it used to be like, but my first experience, that's why I kind of had to go through it in my 40s, like as a newbie. I kind of call it like a coming of age story in my 40s because I didn't, but it is hard. It is you meet a lot of people that you wouldn't meet normally if you're using apps, and that can be a good thing. But for me, I would say 70% of it is a bad thing. Um, uh, yeah, I'm like thinking of all these various stories of where it was a very bad thing. And so I think you get discouraged. I mean, just again, like the entrepreneur's journey, it's like you get enough no's, or, in dating, it's not even a no, it's just like not a good match. It's like if you were selling a product and you kept bringing your product to a place that doesn't buy products, it's kind of like, why am I doing this? Maybe I should stop, trying to sell. It's like, no, go to the right places, find the people that want your product. But it's easier said than done, I think, in business and especially in love. I think apps have created a big problem because people feel more disposable. Like, instead of talking it through, let's just go find another one and go find 10 more. And then the other thing is social media has so many experts on it. I was talking to a guy, actually, fun turn of events. The guy whose dresser I was hiding behind has reached out recently, and like we've become friends, and now I give him dating advice. And so, I was talking to him. I forgot where the story was going. Um, he's very interested in settling down and finding somebody. And he's telling me this is where the story was going. He's telling me all the advice that he's heard about how men should date. And I'm like, oh my God, please don't do that. Don't do any of that. Like, she's watching Instagram reels that are telling her the exact opposite. Nothing is going to go anywhere because you're both like listening to these idiot experts, So I think that is probably one of the biggest problems too. If anyone is getting dating advice from TikTok or Instagram, when I would inadvertently watch a reel that would pop up for me, I would always feel like I was doing dating wrong. And then finally I just went, wait, I have to be me. Otherwise I'm going to find somebody that connects with these like strategies. And that's not love, maybe that works in business, but it definitely doesn't work in love. So
Okay. And yeah, I love that perspective too, in terms of going with your intuition. And like you said, just got to be me for better, for worse, right? And not just go with like these so-called strategies.
yeah.
Um, One more question about that. What's the craziest thing that's ever happened on a first date?
On a first date, the craziest thing. I guess I don't know that this is the craziest, but for like saving you time of me having to go through the catalog, I met with this guy, and it's funny because on dating apps, one of the biggest things is height. That is like what men will, I'm 6'2", I'm 6 feet tall, I'm 6'5", and I'm 5'2", so I don't care. As long as you're like 5'4", maybe 5'5", like it doesn't matter to me. So he kept talking about how he was 6'5", and I didn't care. And he was 6'5", but that was literally the only thing that he had going for him. I can always find something to talk to someone about. I always try to have like a very like grateful demeanor. Immediately I was like, oh my God, he's annoying me, which is crazy because I don't get annoyed on dates. I'm always just like curious and interested. So he starts crying. This might be the craziest. He starts crying, telling me about how his mom just got a warrant out for her arrest. And then he was trying to make it better by telling me that he thought here in California, but it was just bootstrapped to the warrant that was already issued in Texas. And I thought, oh my God. And then, he was telling me about his special needs child, which I don't have an issue with. And then he started talking about wanting to change his career at 44. And then he started crying. And then he said, who would want this? And I had so much compassion for him. I just felt so bad. Even though he had annoyed me earlier. So he went to the bathroom and I got changed because I was definitely planning on paying for my own meal. I'm not out for a free meal. And then when he got back, I went to the bathroom. And when I came out, he was gone. He had paid and just left. And so I don't know. That was a really weird. Usually I'm pretty good at first dates. I have like a just natural intuition vetting process. I was not expecting like any of that. And that was probably pretty crazy just because, like I said, the craziest date was being behind the dresser, but the craziest first date was probably that.
Okay. And just elaborate on the like, why did you have to get behind the dresser? Can you tell us that story of like what actually happened?
Yeah. So it was our third date. We're sitting on his couch. He has kind of a pretty small house. It's a duplex. So somebody comes and knocks on the door, and then she starts punching in the code to the door. So I said, "Do you have a girlfriend?" And he said, "No, that's my ex-girlfriend." And then he said, "We have to come up with a plan to get you out of here." And I'm thinking, me out of here? Like, why am I the problem? So I've seen the movies and the TV shows. So I just like jokingly, I'm like, should I hide? And he said, yeah, good idea. And took me into his room, which was like right off where the front door was. And he was like, how about here? And points to this like corner on the floor. And again, I'm like 5'2", so I could fit back there. And so then he went and opened the door, and I could hear him telling her that he was just relaxing in the dark by himself. And she was like, you don't have any photos of me here, and we haven't slept together in a month. And I'm just like, oh my God, write this all down, and eventually he took her to go for a walk. And then I heard footsteps. And so I have a woman on my podcast that comes on. She's a serial killer expert. She's an expert in serial killers. She has some TV shows and podcasts. She talks to me about what to look for. But one of the things I remembered her saying was women serial killers are scarier than men serial killers. And so I thought, I am not, a lot of people are like, why didn't you go out there and tell her and confront her? And I thought, I don't want to die, just for that guy. So, yeah. So eventually he came back and walked me in my car and said that his car had been broken into. And I was like, oh my God, she broke your window. He's like, no, I left it unlocked. I mean, it's just like so much drama, but also not, that I just thought, well, I'm leaving and those two can have each other.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Crazy. All
Yeah.
right. So tell us about the new podcast.
So the new podcast is called, I haven't actually told anyone the name yet, but I will tell you because I don't know when this is airing, but it's called A Story Worth Living. And the concept was same concept that I applied to dating and the podcast. It was kind of like, why not create a story? So the quote is, create a life that's a story worth telling. And that's what I did with the podcast. I really, created a life that was a story worth telling. But then it's not that gratifying to create a life that's based on what other people think or hear or, based on the outward kind of expression of that. So I rewrote the quote to live a life that's a story worth, create a life that's a story worth living for yourself. And I go on this journey. I'm trying to figure out what my new podcast should be about. And I have a strong connection to buffaloes. Like I grew up around them, and then I went to University of Colorado, so that those are buffaloes. And then I have a strong connection to the state of Minnesota because men that I've dated recently have all tended to be from there, even though I live in California. And so I thought, like, well, maybe I should go to the land that houses all the men that I seem to be interested in. So I Googled buffaloes and Minnesota, and this town, Buffalo, Minnesota, popped up. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm going there. My story starts there. So I flew out to Buffalo, Minnesota, and the podcast is what happened there. Some like crazy stuff happened there. And then everything since then has kind of been a result of that trip. So it's a true story about me trying to create a life that's a story worth living, and hoping that other people will be inspired to do the same for themselves.
Okay. So this is like more is again, personal journey podcast, but are you basically evolving on from the Love Before 100 into this new journey of your life and creating a story worth living?
Yeah. So there will be elements of dating just because I continue to do that and they're kind of naturally in the story, but it won't be dating focused. It will be like full life focused.
Okay. Wow. And then do you have a date set for this to premiere or?
Yeah. So the trailer drops 11/11 because that's like a magical spiritual number. So November 11th. And then the first episode is November 18th.
Okay. Excellent. And so, Rachel, with this journey with the Love Before 100 podcast and everything else you've been through, I mean, what's the biggest, I guess, lesson through all this, maybe that you could give to, because we have an audience full of entrepreneurs and, they're all on their own journey and there's a lot of parallels, of course, like we talked about earlier. But what's the biggest lesson that you could, you could take from everything you've done with the podcast and what it evolved to, given, how it started?
I think the best lesson that I ever learned for anything, which I've applied to love and I've also applied to entrepreneurship, is a couple of years ago, probably like maybe like 7 or 8 years ago, I heard Jim Rohn. No, it was sorry, Bob Proctor. He said in Think and Grow Rich, there's a chapter called Perseverance, and I think it's chapter 8. And he said, read that chapter every single day at 5:30 a.m. for 90 days. And I did that exercise, and I really learned the value of perseverance and just sticking with it, and you just keep going. And whether it's love or business or anything that you like truly want, that's the key. And reading that book every day for 90 days at 5:30 a.m. was what brainwashed me, changed my belief system to be just keep going. That's easier said than done, but if you do it that way, it just sinks in, and you don't think any other way. It just seems like, of course, I'm going to keep going. So that would be my biggest piece of advice. Keep going. And if you don't know how to do that, go read that chapter 90 times at 5:30 a.m.
Love that. Love that advice. All right. And Rachel, if people want to get in touch with you, learn more about the new podcast or any the other projects that you have going on, what's the best way that people can reach out to you?
Either Instagram. I have the Rachel Burch. I mean, that's the best way to actually connect with me. Listening to the podcast, but you can't reach out that way. So Instagram's probably the best place.
All right. And we'll link all that in the show notes for everybody.
Awesome.
All right. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for being here. Really enjoyed this conversation and learning about your journey. Appreciate the time.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
And that is all the time we have for now. We will see you next time.